In any form of art, criticism plays a vital role in helping creators improve their work. In the context of storytelling, it's been very obvious to see that criticism has been used as sort of a weapon to hurt the creation and the creator, rather than to provide constructive feedback that helps that either that author or authors/writers who are consuming content on that author so that they can either learn or grow. And you see this problem the most with the concept of plot holes. There are other criticisms, but I think that plot holes is just generally the most familiar to people. And so I will make a video on plot holes and talking about the meaningful plot holes and the meaningless plot holes. But right now I want to talk about constructive and destructive criticism. As I've said, the role of criticism is to provide constructive feedback so that that author or the people in that field may grow alongside them with that criticism. It points out the weaknesses and the strengths that the author has. And if you're going to point out weaknesses, we should always offer reasonable suggestions so that the author may revise and improve the internal consistency of their series, especially when it's actual plot holes that undermine the themes or the character development of, or rather in the story. I believe that this type of criticism acknowledges the importance of coherence in storytelling and helps the author create a more polished, compelling narrative. And it's not only about pointing out flaws, but it's about offering solutions and encouraging the author to keep growing. On the other hand, focusing on meaningless plot holes can turn criticism into a form of nitpicking that ultimately undermines the purpose of storytelling. When critics obsess over minor details, for example, the character said a certain place was maybe 50 kilometers away, but then later on says it's 100 kilometers away. Yes, of course, there are some stories where this is important. Maybe it's a racing story and maybe the distance has a lot of significance. But in most stories, this is probably a meaningless flaw to point out. This also extends to things like the timing of certain events, the ages of characters. All of this obviously is in context, and like, for example, the ages, if the character is 50 years old, but then when you look back, the character would be 100 years old. It's important to look at the context of the situation and understand that maybe the author simply is trying to say that that person, or that character rather, is old or was old at that time, and not that inherently the age is important. So the reason why this is such a big problem is that it also, well, one of the reasons rather, is because it risks diverting attention from the more important aspects of the narrative, which could be, depending on the story, the themes, the characters, or the emotional journey of those characters, or the plot itself. Another reason why it's so destructive is because it can place unimportant, undue emphasis on small, inconsequential mistakes, rather than fostering a constructive dialogue about the story's broader impact. In extreme cases, this kind of nitpicking can be destructive to authors by discouraging them from taking creative risks by focusing on elements of the story that truly matter because of the fear of being criticized. And I believe that this is something that you can see in today's storytelling, where you have authors for no good reason focus on details in a story that doesn't matter to the overall message and themes of that story. And to make a quick example of this, we have DC Superman. If you know Superman, you know he's very strong, so he can lift a lot of heavy stuff. But now there's a lot of instances where he's lifting a plane or a building from a single point. And so scientifically that would make it so that the building would, or rather that he would crash through the building, because that little point that he's at can't support the entire weight of that building. And so what you get is that the writers will give an explanation of saying that, oh, that Superman is either very careful or he has some type of energy that he encapsulates around the entire structure so that he can lift it. And so this explanation is all well and good, but it really has nothing to do with Superman's character outside of his abilities, so to speak. Like, this was never a question that needed to be answered in this way. And now if we view it in the destructive criticism lens, what we see is that authors who are seeing this play out, they will now have to think of every single scientific fact of their series to say, like, okay, I need to make sure that this is actually realistically possible. And then all of a sudden you see that there are characters who, when you calculate that they're able to move possibly faster than the speed of light, then the authors feel like they have to explain that. And I've seen such cases being viewed as plot holes, but it's so minor and so part of storytelling that you really can't call this a plot hole. And to expect authors/writers to always be aware of scientific facts and limitations of reality inevitably kills storytelling. So I might not have explained that well, but I hope you understand the essence of what I'm trying to say. That it is more important that an author focuses on what truly matters to their story and are able to write without the fear of being criticized over trivial details. What's important that is being conveyed in the story is that one character is faster, and so it's more important to focus on that fact that this character is faster than the other, rather than to dive into the intricacies of the impossibilities of moving or being able to see at the speed of light. In the end, what truly matters is whether those inconsistencies harm the reader's experience or engagement with the story. And even in that case, the readers also need to do their own due diligence to understand when something is happening that they do not understand. So they should reread the story and do the work instead of simply seeing something that minorly confuses them and jumping and saying, oh, this is a plot hole. And it is also important to realize that plot holes are a natural part of storytelling, but not all plot holes are equally detrimental. And so in that way, we should see that our criticism of storytelling should be more nuanced than to simply point out inconsequential mistakes, but to be able to see that this mistake or inconsistency is minor in the scope of the author's greater artistic vision. And that will be it for this video. I thank you for watching it all the way to the end if you have, and I really hope you've learned something new today.